Over the last few weeks, we've looked at how to prune, shape, and style a Chinese elm bonsai. We've done a lot of work on this tree, but it's really not that much compared to all the other things that we need to do to care for a bonsai, which include repotting, watering, and fertilizing. All these things are important if we want our bonsai to look healthy, thrive, and survive. Today, I want to look at one of them in particular, watering. But before we get to watering, let's have a quick chat about soil and then fertilization. When choosing a bonsai tree or when making a bonsai from a seedling or a small tree from the garden, you'll be presented with a choice of soil. In most cases, there will be two choices, either soil that's in a pot or soil that's in a plastic bag. Soil in a pot may look like normal potting soil, or it might have larger particles such as bark and stones. The soil in a plastic bag will feel light and fluffy, and you can see individual components such as expanded clay or perlite. And it will probably look nothing like soil from your garden. Both types of soil are designed to be used in bonsai, but they're used for different purposes. Soil in a pot is usually heavier and denser, and is best suited for trees that prefer a heavier, more compact soil. This would include deciduous trees such as maples, elms, oaks, and beeches. Soil in a plastic bag is lighter and airier and is best for trees that prefer a lighter, drier soil. This includes conifers such as pines and spruces. If you aren't sure what type of soil to use, ask the person you bought the tree from. If you are making a bonsai from a tree in your garden, it's usually best to use the soil in a plastic bag, even for deciduous trees. It just gives you more flexibility with watering and is a better medium long term. The most common bonsai soils are akadama, pumice, and bark. Most of my bonsai are grown in a mix of all three, which suits most trees. Akadama is a baked clay soil that's relatively heavy and retains some moisture. Pumice is lightweight and doesn't retain moisture very well. Bark, on the other hand, breaks down over time into a fine dust and holds moisture very well. It also has a tendency to float, so if you're going to use bark, be sure to soak it first. These three components work well together, providing a good balance between weight, drainage, and moisture retention. If you're planting a new tree in an existing pot, it's generally a good idea to replace most of the old soil with fresh soil. You should always remove any diseased roots while you're doing this, and it's a good opportunity to check for pests and diseases. The frequency with which you need to change the soil depends on the age of the tree and the type of soil. Younger trees need fresh soil more frequently because their root systems grow quickly and outcompete the soil's ability to provide nutrients. Trees and bark, on the other hand, require fresh soil more often than trees in akadama or pumice. In general, though, most bonsais should have their soil replaced every 2 to 3 years. It's also worth noting that if you buy soil separately, you can mix and match the different types to suit your needs. For example, you might want to add some extra pumice to help with drainage if you live in an area that rains a lot. Now that we've got the soil covered, let's talk about watering. The single most important rule for watering bonsai is never let them dry out completely. You should always water when the top inch or so of soil is dry. How frequently you need to do this depends on several factors, including the type of tree, the type of soil, and the weather. Conifers and trees with a high proportion of bark in their soil will dry out faster than broadleaf deciduous trees and trees with a high proportion of akadama or pumice in their soil. Similarly, trees in a shallow container will dry out faster than those in a deep container, and trees in full sun will dry out much faster than those in shade or part shade. In general, though, most bonsai need watering every 1 to 2 weeks. During spring and summer, and once every 2 to 4 weeks in autumn and winter. It is always best to err on the side of caution and water when the top inch or so of soil is dry. A simple finger dip is usually enough to tell if the soil is moist. If it feels dry, then it's time to water. If you aren't sure though, it's always best to wait a day or two and then check again. Overwatering is less of a problem than underwatering, but it's still something to avoid. You can tell if a tree is thirsty by looking for signs such as wilting leaves, dry and crispy leaf edges, and dropping leaves. If you see these signs, then water the tree thoroughly until water runs out of the drainage holes. But take care not to create a waterlogged situation where the soil remains saturated for long periods. This can lead to root rot and death. There are a few tricks you can use to help judge how thirsty your trees are. One is to use a moisture meter. These are inexpensive devices that come in different styles, but they all measure the amount of moisture in the soil. They're especially useful for containers without a drainage hole, such as those used for growing bonsai in a greenhouse or indoors. Another trick is to lift the container. A dry container will be much lighter than a wet one. This can be helpful, but it isn't as reliable as other methods. After all, you could pick up a wet container by its sides, or you could have wet soil that is not well compacted. Also, if you're growing multiple bonsai in one container, lifting it will only tell you whether the container is dry, not whether each individual tree needs water. My favorite method is to stick a finger into the soil to check the moisture levels. It's not foolproof, but it works for me. One final point about watering is to ensure that the water you use doesn't contain salts that can build up in the soil and damage the roots. The best source of water is rainwater. However, if you don't have access to this, tap water is usually okay, providing you allow it to stand for 24 hours before using it. This allows chlorine and other chemicals to dissipate. That brings us to the end of the watering guide. I know it's been a bit basic, but it's really important to get the fundamentals right before moving on to more advanced techniques. Last but not least, let's talk about fertilization. Like watering, the frequency and type of fertilizer will depend on the type of tree and the time of year. Broadleaf deciduous trees are generally heavy feeders and require regular fertilization during the growing season, which is usually from early spring to late summer. Conifers, on the other hand, are generally light feeders and don't require as much fertilizer. Most bonsai are fertilized on a little and often basis, meaning that it's better to feed smaller amounts more frequently than to feed large amounts infrequently. The most common frequency for deciduous trees is once every 2 to 4 weeks. If you're unsure, once every 4 weeks is a good place to start. Always follow the instructions on the fertilizer packaging. If you're buying fertilizer for the first time, you'll be faced with many different options. There are organic and non-organic fertilizers, granular and liquid fertilizers, slow release and fast release fertilizers, and fertilizers for specific tree types such as conifers or broadleaf evergreens. The most important thing is to choose a balanced fertilizer with an equal amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I tend to use a generic bonsai fertilizer for most of my trees, but you can use whatever you like as long as it's suitable for bonsai and provides all 3 of these key nutrients. Fertilizers are measured in 3 numbers, such as 10-10. 10. These refer to the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in the fertilizer. Some fertilizers may have additional numbers which refer to trace elements. Don't worry about the trace elements. The most important thing is the first 3 numbers. That completes our brief introduction to the care of bonsai trees. I haven't gone into a huge amount of detail here, but I wanted to cover the basics so you know what you need to do to keep your bonsai alive and thriving. Over the coming months, I'll be covering these topics in more detail and sharing my experiences and tips for each of them. So stay tuned for more updates. In the meantime, why not check out my other videos on pruning, styling, and planting a Chinese elm bonsai? Thanks for watching.